Hi, everybody. My name is Elan Tran. I'm just going to pull up my presentation really quick. Okay. Yeah, so I work in the plant ecology laboratory, but I also am doing some work on mushrooms, and so that's what I'm going to go over today. So this presentation is a brief introduction into mushrooms, and let's get started. Okay. Okay, so what many of you may know is that mushrooms are part of a fungus, but you might not know that below the mushroom, there's something that grows called mycelium. And mycelium is kind of like the roots of plants, but it's thinner and harder to see. And so the mushroom and the mycelium together make up the fungus. You can't just have a mushroom on its own. Um, and the mushroom is really important because it produces something called spores, which are kind of like the seeds of plants, so they can disperse in the environment and then grow into a new fungus. And so because the mushroom produces these spores, we call it the reproductive structure. Okay, so these are some pictures that I've taken in the field here at Archbold, and you can see the diversity of mushrooms just in these 4 photos, right? So they're different sizes, shapes, colors, and that kind of leads me to my next point, which is that mushrooms look like a bunch of different things. They come in many shapes, sizes, and even smells. And you can usually tell them apart by their color, their growth pattern, the substrate, or what they're growing on, and their abundance. So if you look at these pictures, you can see how each one is a different color, but you can also see how they're growing in different ways. So the yellow ones are growing in a really tight cluster, whereas the brown one is isolated, it's growing alone. The red ones are growing close, but not as close as the yellow ones. And the orange ones are scattered throughout this log. And so that actually leads to the next way that mushrooms can differ, which is what they grow on. And so the orange ones are growing on a decaying tree, whereas the other ones are just growing directly in the soil. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on was abundance. So when a fungus does produce mushrooms, depending on the fungus, it'll produce them in a different amount. So you can see the yellow ones, there's a bunch of them, the same kind of with the orange, whereas with the brown and the red, when it does produce mushrooms, it produces a fewer number. Okay. So just like mushrooms can look very different, they also can eat different things. And so mushrooms obviously don't have mouths, they're not going to pick up a hamburger and eat it. But how they eat food is by absorbing nutrients from their environment. And so there's 3 main ways they can do this, which can be categorized into the saprotrophs, the mycorrhizae, and the parasites. And so saprotrophs obtain nutrients from decaying matter. So that can be like dead trees, plants, and sometimes dead animals. And so moving on to the next one, mycorrhizae, they obtain their nutrients from the interactions they form with plants. And this is pretty cool. So the mycelium of the mushroom will interact with the roots of plants, and they can trade nutrients between themselves to help feed each other. And then the last one are the parasites. So this is kind of similar to mycorrhizae because they form associations with other organisms, but instead of trading nutrients, they just steal them from the other one, and they don't provide anything in return. So 3 major ways that mushrooms obtain nutrients, or 3 major types, are the saprotrophs, the mycorrhizae, and parasites. I also wanted to touch on the life cycle, which I kind of mentioned briefly, but So this shows that the mushroom is producing spores, which will disperse, and they start to grow into hyphae, which eventually makes up the mycelium. And then the mycelium will produce a young mushroom that eventually matures into a mature mushroom and starts the process over again. Okay. And so my last slide, I just wanted to go over what I'm doing at Archbold right now. So I am helping to curate the fungal herbarium. And so what that means is I'm going to places on the Lake Wales Ridge, which is in green on the map here. And I'm collecting mushrooms and preserving them in a giant dried collection. And so this is going to help us to document the diversity of mushroom producing fungi on the Lake Wales Ridge. And it will also serve as a resource for future scientists to come and study. And I've been having a great time doing it. And so I just wanted to thank you all for listening. And with that, I will turn it over back to Dustin.
Thank you, Elan. That was really cool. I've heard the phrase "wood wide web" used before to talk about all the mycorrhizal fungi. So that stuff is so cool.
Yeah,
all right,
it's incredible.